Imagine this: a raging blizzard on the frozen Eastern Front in World War II, temperatures plunging to minus 40 degrees, visibility near zero. A full platoon of German Wehrmacht soldiers, 38 men, sets out on a routine patrol from their forward position near the Volkhov River, just outside Leningrad. They are experienced, well-equipped for winter warfare, and expected back within hours. But they never return. Search parties brave the storm the next day, following their tracks, until the footprints simply vanish in the snow, as if the men were lifted into the sky. No bodies, no equipment scattered, no signs of Soviet ambush. Just gone. This is one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries of the Second World War, documented in declassified German military reports and eyewitness accounts from surviving comrades, officially attributed to the brutal Russian winter or perhaps a partisan attack. But those who were there whisper something darker, something that defies explanation. Tonight, we're diving into a story that echoes that disappearance, but shifted to our modern era. Reports from U.S. soldiers stationed at remote outposts have surfaced over the years. Unexplained vanishings in harsh conditions, apparitions of long-dead warriors, and barracks haunted by echoes of wars past. Our focus tonight is on a specific location: the old W-2-era barracks at Fort Riley, Kansas, a sprawling army post with roots going back to the 1850s, but home to structures built during the massive mobilization of World War II. These barracks housed thousands during the war, and later troops training for Korea, Vietnam, and more recent conflicts. But one particular building, known among soldiers as Barracks 5703 on Custer Hill, has earned a reputation that persists to this day. Built in the early 1940s, it's a classic wooden structure, creaking floors, narrow hallways, boiler rooms that rumble like distant artillery. Soldiers who've lived there from the post-9/11 era through the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan report the same things: cold spots that defy the heater, footsteps marching in unison when no one's around, and shadows of figures in old uniforms that don't belong to any living unit. What causes a place like this to become haunted? Is it the weight of history, the stress, the loss, the young men who never came home from distant fronts, or something more specific tied to the land itself? Fort Riley has seen its share of tragedy, training accidents, suicides in the old days, and the lingering pain of deployments. But the stories from Barracks 5703 go beyond grief. They speak of something restless, something that reaches out to the living. Tonight, through first-hand accounts from veterans who served there in the 2000s and 2010s, we'll explore what happens when modern soldiers confront the unknown in their own backyard. Chapter 1: Arrival at the Hill. My name is Sergeant First Class Ryan Thompson. I enlisted in 2004, straight out of high school, and spent most of my career with the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red one out of Fort Riley, Kansas. 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. I've seen my share of combat, lost friends, carried the weight that comes with it. But nothing in all those deployments prepared me for what waited back home in an old set of barracks on Custer Hill. We'd just rotated back from Iraq. The whole battalion was exhausted, running on fumes after months of constant patrols, convoys, and the ever-present threat of IEDs. Command needed space for incoming units, so while newer housing underwent renovation, they billeted us in one of the original World War II-era wooden barracks, Building 5703. 3 stories tall, narrow hallways, creaking pine floors that groaned under every boot, and a persistent smell of old wood, mothballs, and heating oil, no matter the season. The building had been standing since the early 1940s, thrown up quickly to house the flood of soldiers mobilizing for the war in Europe and the Pacific. Generations of troops had passed through it, since headed to Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, and now us, coming home from the sandbox. I was a staff sergeant at the time, responsible for a squad bay on the 2nd floor. My Joes were glad to be stateside, talking big about leave plans, cold beer, and seeing family. The bay itself was standard old-school Army, double rows of metal bunks with thin mattresses, wall lockers lined up like sentries, a single latrine and shower room at the end of the hall, and a small day room with a sagging pool table and a couple of mismatched couches. The heater pipes ran along the baseboards and clanked whenever the ancient boiler kicked on, sending a low, rumbling vibration through the entire structure, almost like distant artillery rolling across a far-off battlefield. The first night, I was unpacking my duffel in the small alcove reserved for NCOs, just a partitioned corner with a single bunk and a desk. Most of the platoon was already asleep or pretending to be, worn out from the flight and in processing. Around Odo 200, I drew fire guard duty. Even NCOs pull it when the roster is thin. I sat at the CQ desk on the first floor under dim fluorescent lights, flipping through an old issue of Stars and Stripes, listening to the building settle. That's when I heard the footsteps. They started overhead, directly above the desk on the second floor. Slow, measured thuds. One set of boots pacing the length of the bay, and back again. Deliberate, unhurried. Thump, thump, thump. Pause. Then returning. I figured one of my soldiers couldn't sleep, maybe dealing with the same readjustment junk that hits after a deployment. I keyed the hand mic on the desk radio. Second floor. Who's up walking around? Nothing but static and the faint hum of the heater. I waited a minute. The pacing resumed, same cadence. I grabbed my flashlight, climbed the wooden stairs that creaked loud enough to wake half the building, and pushed. Opened the door to the bay. Moonlight filtered through the high windows, casting long shadows between the bunks. Every soldier was out cold, blankets pulled high, soft snores rising and falling in rhythm. No one standing, no one moving. I swept the beam across the room, checked the latrine, even peeked into my own alcove. Empty. Shaking my head, I went back downstairs. The magazine didn't hold my interest anymore. 10 minutes later, the footsteps started again. Only this time, it wasn't one set. It sounded like several walking in unison, almost like a small formation keeping cadence without a caller. I muttered under my breath, "What the hell is this?" Flashlight in hand, I bounded up the stairs again, taking them two at a time. The bay was exactly as I'd left it. Not a soul stirring, but the air felt different, heavier, and noticeably colder. I could see my breath. The wall thermostat read 68 degrees, same as downstairs. No windows cracked open, no draft I could find. Morning formation came early. Over chow, I asked around casually, "Anybody have trouble sleeping last night? Pacing or anything?" Private First Class Ramirez grinned. "SFC, you pulling pranks already? Trying to scare the new guys?" Specialist Hayes, a quiet kid from Texas who'd been on his second tour, caught my eye and pulled me aside after the others moved on. "It wasn't just you, Sergeant. Last time we were here, before the deployment, same thing happened. Footsteps at night, perfect step, and sometimes faint voices, like old shortwave radio traffic, crackling. Only the words aren't English." "Russian?" I asked, thinking partisans or something from the history of the place. He shook his head. "German." German. Fort Riley had trained entire divisions for the European theater back in the day. Thousands of young men had drilled on these same parade fields, slept in these same racks before shipping out to fight the Wehrmacht. A lot of them never came home, but that was 70 years ago. We laughed it off as barracks legend, the kind of story soldiers tell to mess with each other. Stress, jet lag, the mind playing tricks after too much time downrange. That's what I told myself. But over the next few nights, small things started disappearing. A soldier's wallet left on his bunk would turn up missing, only to be found days later in the basement boiler room, a space that was supposed to be locked and off limits. Boots, dog tags, even a Kevlar helmet once. Always the boiler room. Maintenance swore no one had keys but them. Then came the night I saw him. I was in my alcove, door cracked open trying to wind down. Moonlight spilled across the bay floor in pale rectangles. At the far end, between the last row of bunks, a figure stood motionless. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a long greatcoat that reached almost to his boots. On his head, a helmet that caught the light wrong, rounded, with a flared skirt. Nothing like the Army's ACH. We wore. He faced the wall, unmoving, as if waiting for an order. My heart slammed against my ribs. I sat up slowly. "Hey, who's there?" No answer. No turn of the head. I reached for my maglite on the desk, flicked it on, and aimed the beam straight at him. The light passed through empty air. For a split second, I saw a pale face, young, hollow-eyed, lips moving silently. Then he dissolved, like smoke caught in a sudden gust. The bay remained quiet. No one woke. No one stirred. I sat frozen until dawn, light on, staring at that spot. When the sun finally came up, There was nothing there but scuffed floorboards and the faint smell of cold snow that hadn't fallen in Kansas for weeks. After that, I started listening closer to the footsteps when they came. They weren't random. They were searching, marching up and down the rows, stopping at each bunk as if counting heads, looking for someone who wasn't there, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was walking our bay wasn't resting. It was still on patrol. Chapter 2. The Cold Room. My name is Corporal Emily Vargas. I joined the Army in 2008 as a 68W combat medic and got attached to a line company in the 1st Infantry Division at Fort Riley. I did one tour in Iraq and was gearing up for Afghanistan when we got stuck in those same old barracks on Custer Hill, Building 5703. The guys on the lower floors had their stories, but the 3rd floor, where the female soldiers were billeted, had its own reputation. Room 312, the corner room at the very end of the hall, was the one nobody wanted. It was bigger than the others, with 2 windows that looked out over the tree line, but it always felt wrong, like the air was thicker in there. After a long field problem in the Flint Hills, we came back covered in mud and half frozen. The barracks were already overcrowded, so when the billet NCO started calling out room assignments, I ended up drawing 312 with my battle buddy, Specialist Lee. She groaned when she heard it. "Great," she said. The freezer room. The guys downstairs had warned us. They said no matter how high you cranked the heat, that room stayed cold. Maintenance had been out half a dozen times and always came back with the same answer. Old building, thin walls, nothing they could do. We moved in anyway, dropped our rucks, claimed bunks, and tried to make it feel normal. The first couple of nights were fine. We were so tired from the field that we slept like the dead. But on the 3rd night, I woke up shivering. Not the normal Kansas winter chill, but a deep, biting cold that settled in your bones and wouldn't leave. I could see my breath hanging in the air. Lee was already sitting up, arms wrapped around herself. "You feel that?" she whispered. "Yeah, heat or die." We checked the thermostat on the wall. 70 degrees. The radiator pipes were hot to the touch, clanking away like they were working overtime, but the room felt like we'd left the windows wide open. In January, we threw on extra blankets and went back to sleep. Figured it was a fluke. It wasn't. Every night after that, the cold came. Same time, around 0200, you'd wake up gasping, frost on your lips, fingers numb. We started sleeping in our fleece caps and gloves. Reported it to the charge of quarters, who reported it to facilities, who sent a guy out with a thermometer. He walked in, took one reading, and shrugged. "Shows 71. You ladies sure you're not just acclimated to the desert?" Lee gave him a look that could strip paint. He left pretty quick after that. Then the whispers started. At first I thought it was wind rattling the old window frames, a low murmur rising and falling. But the more I listened, the more it sounded like voices. Men's voices, low and urgent, overlapping. Not English. The cadence was wrong, the consonants sharp. I don't speak German, but I'd heard enough from the History channels and old war movies to recognize the sound. One night, Lee had her laptop open, trying to stream a show to drown it out. She paused it suddenly. "Vargas, listen." The room had gone dead silent except for the voices. Clearer than ever, a single word repeated, "Kameraden, Kameraden." I sat up. What the hell does that mean? She typed it into her phone. Her face went pale. "Comrades." We stared at each other. The voices stopped as suddenly as they'd started. Then the door handle rattled, hard, like someone on the other side was testing it, trying to get in. We had the deadbolt thrown and the chain on, standard habit in shared barracks. The rattle came again, stronger, metal clacking against metal. I grabbed my flashlight from under the pillow and crept to the door. Lee right behind me. I put my eye to the peephole. Empty hallway. Fluorescent lights buzzing. No movement. I dropped to the floor and shined the light under the door. No shadow. No feet. The rattling stopped. We didn't sleep the rest of that night. Sat back to back on one bunk, lights on, waiting for morning. The next day, we went to the first sergeant. Told him the room was uninhabitable, cold, noises, the whole thing. He sighed like he'd heard it before. "Look, girls, I get it. Old building, creaks, drafts. But we're maxed out. Unless something's actually broken, you stay put." That night, it got worse. I was drifting off when I felt weight on my chest. Heavy, crushing, like someone had sat down full force. I couldn't draw breath. My eyes snapped open. A shadow hung over me. Man-shaped, darker than the dark around it. Broad shoulders, the suggestion of a long coat. No face I could make out, just two hollow spots where eyes should be. It leaned closer, and the cold poured off it like dry ice. I tried to scream. Nothing came out. Across the room, Lee gasped awake, thrashing under the same pressure. The shadow lifted as suddenly as it had come. The weight vanished. Air rushed back into my lungs. We bolted from the room, pounding on doors until half the floor was in the hall in various states of undress. We told them what happened. Most looked skeptical, but a few of the older female soldiers nodded like they knew exactly what we meant. We moved rooms the next morning. First Sergeant approved it after Lee threatened to go to IG about unsafe living conditions. But the cold followed us 2 doors down. Not as bad, but enough to notice. And sometimes, late at night, we'd hear the whispers drifting down the hallway from 312. Before we deployed, an old motor pool sergeant told me the story. During Lafay, that building had been overflow for a training company that later shipped to Europe. A lot of them ended up on the Eastern Front. One platoon in particular never came home, lost in a blizzard near Leningrad, vanished without a trace. He said some people believe the building remembers, that on cold nights those men are still out there, marching through the snow, calling for the comrades they left behind. I thought he was full of it. Until Afghanistan, when I woke up in a fob in Kandahar, sweating in 100-degree heat, dreaming of snow so deep it swallowed men whole, and voices calling my name in a language I didn't know. I still don't know if they wanted to hurt us, or if they were trying to tell us something we weren't ready to hear. Chapter 3. The Marching Shadows. My name is Staff Sergeant Marcus Kane. I've been infantry my whole career, 11B with the 1st Infantry Division, big red one, same as the others, multiple combat tours, 2 in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. I've led soldiers through some of the worst places you can imagine, taken fire, lost brothers, carried the kind of memories that don't fade. By 2012, I was on my way back from Kandahar, dealing with the aftermath. Nightmares, jumpy at loud noises, the whole reintegration package. Command knew the signs, but the Army being the Army, they put us right back into those old WTH barracks on Custer Hill while permanent housing got sorted. Building 5703 again. Same creaking floors, same rumbling boiler, same stories floating around from the previous rotations. I was a squad leader by then, responsible for 9 Joes in a bay on the 1st floor. The guys were raw. Some were fresh off their first deployment, others like me on their 3rd or 4th. Everyone was trying to act normal, drinking in the day room, talking about girls back home, planning fishing trips or whatever got their minds off the war. But you could feel the tension under the surface. Fights broke out over nothing, guys staring at walls for hours. Sleep was hard to come by even without the barracks adding its own problems. The marching started a few nights after we settled in. It always began the same way. A faint cadence overhead on the 2nd floor, boots hitting the pine boards in perfect unison. Left, right, left. No caller, no shuffle, just crisp, disciplined steps like a platoon executing close order drill. At first, only a couple of us heard it. We'd look at each other across the bunks, eyebrows raised. Then it got louder, more frequent. Soon the whole bay was waking up to it. One night I'd had enough. I stacked 4 of my soldiers, grabbed flashlights, and we cleared the 2nd floor like it was a building in Ramadi. Stairs creaking under our weight, weapons at low ready even though we weren't carrying rifles in the barracks. We burst into the bay up there. Nothing. Rows of sleeping soldiers from another company. Not a soul out of their rack. We checked the 3rd floor, the stairwells, even the latrines. Empty. Came back down, and 10 minutes later, the marching started again. Same rhythm, same direction. We started calling it the Ghost Platoon. Gallows humor, the kind soldiers used to cope. Then Private Ellis started seeing things. He was 19, straight out of basic first duty station, wide-eyed kid from Ohio, who'd never even left the States before enlisting. Good soldier, eager, but the deployment had rattled him bad. One night around 0300, he woke the entire bay screaming, "Sarge, shadows, they're marching right between the bunks." We jumped up, hearts pounding. Ellis was sitting bolt upright, eyes huge, pointing at the center aisle. They just walked past me, whole line of them. Old uniforms, helmets, everything. The bay went quiet. A couple guys laughed nervously. I told him to settle down. It was just a nightmare. Get some water, but I saw the look in his eyes. I'd seen it before in sector when someone's mind cracks under the strain. We chalked it up to PTSD, got him to behavioral health the next day. They put him on meds, light duty, but the next night I saw them too. I was pulling CQ, sitting in the day room with the glass door looking into the bay. Lights were dimmed for the night, just the red exit sign glowing. I was nursing a cup of coffee, scrolling through my phone, trying to stay awake. Movement caught my eye through the glass. Shadows. Tall, man-sized, moving single file down the center aisle between the bunks. No sound at all, just gliding, perfectly spaced, like a formation on parade rest marching slow. I could make out the outline of long coats, rounded helmets, rifles slung that didn't look like M4s. I froze, coffee cup halfway to my mouth. There had to be 25 of them. They reached the end of the bay, turned as one, and started back the way they'd come, passing right through the footlockers and wall lockers like they weren't there. I dropped the cup, hot coffee splashing my leg, and bolted for the light switch, flooded the bay with fluorescence. Nothing. Just my soldiers stirring, grumbling about the noise. I radioed the runner on the 3rd floor. "You got anything weird up there?" "Negative, Sarge. Quiet." I sat back down, pulse hammering, and watched the glass door until sunrise. They didn't come back that night. After Ellis, the activity ramped up. He started sleepwalking. We'd find him in the middle of the night, standing at the end of the bay in his PT shorts, rigid at parade rest, staring at the brick wall like he was waiting for inspection. Eyes open but unfocused. When we'd wake him, he couldn't remember how he got there. One morning, he wasn't in his rack. Bed made, gear squared away, but no Ellis. We searched the building top to bottom, found him curled up in the basement boiler room, knees to chest, shaking. He was muttering something over and over. I knelt down. "Ellis, talk to me. What's going on?" His lips moved. Der Schnee. Der Schnee. The snow. He didn't speak a word of German. Never had. Command pulled him out, sent him to inpatient at Eisenhower for acute stress reaction. We never saw him again in the unit. After that, the marching got louder. Some nights it sounded like it was right overhead, boots pounding hard enough to vibrate the light fixtures. Other nights it came from the walls, or from under the floorboards. Always the same cadence, always searching. My soldiers started sleeping with lights on. A few requested transfers to other billets. I put in the paperwork, but nothing moved fast in the rear D. I kept thinking about what Hayes had mentioned years earlier, those old reports of a Wehrmacht platoon vanishing in a blizzard on the Eastern Front. 38 men, gone without a trace. And here we were, hearing what sounded like 38 pairs of boots marching through our barracks night after night. Were they looking for their lost comrades? Or were they trying to warn us that some shadows never stop marching, no matter how far you run from the war? Chapter 4. The Boiler Room. My name is Specialist Derek Hayes. I was the quiet guy from Texas that SFC Thompson mentioned earlier. Enlisted in 2007, infantry with the 1st ID, did 2 pumps to Iraq and 1 to Afghanistan. I kept my head down, did my job, didn't talk much about what we saw over there. By 2013, the battalion was cycling through Fort Riley again, and once more they shoved us into Building 5703 on Custer Hill. The stories had been circulating for years by then. Footsteps, cold spots, shadows marching through the bays. Most of us rolled our eyes at first, but after a few weeks, even the hardest skeptics stopped laughing. The basement boiler room was the part nobody liked to talk about. It was off-limits to soldiers, heavy steel door at the bottom of the stairs, asbestos warnings plastered everywhere, padlocked most of the time. Maintenance had the only keys, yet things kept turning up down there. Wallets, ID tags, boots, even a full ruck once. Always items that had gone missing from the bays upstairs. Guys would swear they left something on their bunk, tear the place apart looking for it, and a day or two later, maintenance would find it sitting neat as you please, on the concrete floor next to the boiler. No footprints in the dust, no sign anybody had been there. We started calling it the drop-off point. Black humor again. Like whatever was walking the halls at night was collecting gear for a patrol it could never finish. One February night, the power flickered across the whole building. Lights dimmed, came back, dimmed again. Then the heater cut out completely. The rumbling we'd all grown used to just stopped. Within minutes, the temperature started plunging. Old wooden barracks don't hold heat worth a damn, and with outside temps in the teens, it got cold fast. Guys were pulling on every layer they had, cursing and complaining. The CQ called facilities, but they said it'd be hours before a tech could make it out. Storm coming in, roads icing over, higher priority calls ahead of us. SFC Thompson looked around the day room and asked for a volunteer to go down and check the breaker panel. Nobody jumped at it. I don't know why I raised my hand. Maybe I was tired of listening to everybody bitch. Maybe I just wanted to prove to myself the place wasn't getting under my skin. Thompson handed me the spare key maintenance had left with the CQ years ago. "Don't go alone," he said. I nodded like I intended to listen, then headed for the stairs by myself. The basement door opened with a screech that echoed down the cinderblock corridor. Stairs descended into pitch black. The air hit me immediately, damp, heavy, with the smell of rust, old coal dust, and something metallic I couldn't place. I clicked on my flashlight. The beam cut through floating particles, landing on the massive boiler squatting in the middle of the room like some ancient iron beast. Pipes ran overhead in every direction, dripping condensation. I found the breaker box on the far wall, flipped the main, reset a couple that had tripped. The boiler groaned, then kicked back to life with a deep thud that vibrated through the floor. Lights upstairs flickered on. I could hear faint cheers from the bays. I should have left then, but as I turned to go, the voices started. Low at first, almost lost under the boiler noise. Men talking, urgent but controlled, the way soldiers speak when they're trying to keep quiet on patrol. The words weren't English. Sharp consonants, clipped vowels. German. I froze, beam sweeping the room. Nothing but shadows and pipes. Then clearer, "Wo sind Sie?" Another voice answered, overlapping. "Kameraden verloren. Im Schnee." Where are they? Comrades lost. In the snow. The hairs on my neck stood up. My flashlight trembled. The shadows on the far wall moved, dozens of them, tall and elongated, forming a perfect circle, marching slowly, boots raising and lowering in unison, but making no sound on the concrete. Around and around, like a unit trapped in an endless loop. I backed up a step, and my heel kicked something metal. The beam dropped. An old helmet lay on the floor, not American. Stahlhelm, flared skirt, Wehrmacht issue. Dull gray paint, chipped and rusted, but unmistakable. No way it belonged to any modern unit. No way it should have been sitting in a locked army basement in Kansas. The shadows stopped marching. Every dark figure turned toward me at once. The temperature plummeted. Frost formed on the pipes overhead. My breath came in white clouds. I snatched the helmet without thinking, turned and ran. Took the stairs 3 at a time, slammed the steel door behind me, fumbled the padlock back on with shaking hands. Upstairs, I burst into the day room, holding the helmet out like evidence. The bay went dead silent. Thompson took it from me, turned it over slow. No markings inside, no liner even, just cold steel. That night, the building shook, not creaking or settling. Full-on, pounding footsteps, dozens of them, marching the length of every floor at once. Light fixtures rattled, dust sifted from the ceilings. Soldiers spilled out of their racks into the halls, some in boots and PTs, some still half asleep. We evacuated onto the grass in front of the building. Snow had started falling. Heavy, wet flakes, unusual for Kansas that early, wind whipping them sideways. As we stood there, shivering in formation, watching our breath, figures appeared at the tree line. Shadowy ranks in long greatcoats and rounded helmets. 38 of them standing at attention for a moment before dissolving into the swirling white. The marching stopped after that. Command accelerated the demolition schedule. Within months, they tore down half the building, put up new brick billets. But on snowy nights, if you drive past Custer Hill with the windows down, veterans say you can still hear it. Faint boots on wooden floors that aren't there anymore. And sometimes, in the new barracks nearby, a soldier wakes up to find an old rusted helmet sitting at the foot of his bunk. No one ever admits to putting it there. Chapter 5. The Warning. My name is Lieutenant Alex Rivera. I graduated West Point in 2012 and took my first platoon in the 1st Infantry Division at Fort Riley the following year. By 2014, I was a brand new platoon leader, full of academy doctrine, and convinced that good order and discipline could fix just about anything. My platoon had just returned from a rotation at the National Training Center, and like every other unit on post, we were temporarily housed in Building 5703 while the newer barracks underwent maintenance. I had heard the rumors. Footsteps, cold spots, missing items turning up in the boiler room. I dismissed them outright. Soldiers will always invent stories to explain creaky old buildings, and I wasn't about to let superstition undermine morale or readiness. I took a small office on the second floor for myself, just off the main bay my platoon occupied. It had a single window overlooking the parade field, a metal desk, and a folding cot. Functional. I spent most evenings there catching up on paperwork, writing OER support forms, and reviewing after-action reports under the hum of a desk lamp. One night in early December, the building was quieter than usual. Most of the platoon was on block leave or pulling duty elsewhere, so the bay held only a skeleton crew. I was alone in the office, door closed, reading through training schedules by lamplight. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the old window frames. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps on the door, precise, military. I looked up. "Come in." Nothing. The door stayed shut. I waited a few seconds, then went back to my reports. A minute later, knock, knock, knock. Harder this time. I stood, crossed the room, and opened the door. The hallway stretched empty under buzzing fluorescents. No one in sight either direction. I stepped out, checked the bay. My soldiers were asleep or pretending to be. The third-floor stairwell was silent. I even walked down to the CQ desk. The runner on duty looked up from his phone. "Everything good, sir? You hear anybody knocking on my door just now?" He shook his head. "Negative. Place is dead tonight." I went back upstairs, chalked it up to wind or settling wood, and locked the door behind me. The third knock didn't come from the door. It came from inside the room. I spun around. The air had changed. Thick, heavy, and suddenly 20 degrees colder. My breath fogged in front of me. Frost crawled across the inside of the window pane even though the radiator was clanking away. A figure stood between my desk and the cot. He wore a long greatcoat, collar turned up against a cold that wasn't in the room until he arrived. The helmet was unmistakable, rounded, flared, Wehrmacht pattern. His uniform was faded, soaked through as if he'd been marching in deep snow. Water pooled silently on the floorboards around his boots, though the wood didn't darken. His face was young, barely older than my Joe's, pale, drawn, eyes wide and urgent. He raised one gloved hand and pointed straight at me, then turned the gesture toward the window, toward the open parade field beyond. His mouth moved. No sound came out at first, but the words formed clear enough that I understood them anyway. Der Blizzard. Laufen nicht. The blizzard. Do not run. He repeated it, more insistent, jabbing his finger toward the darkness outside. His expression wasn't threatening. It was desperate, pleading. I took a step forward. "Who are you? What do you want?" The moment I spoke, he began to fade, edges blurring like snow blown across glass. The cold intensified for a heartbeat, then rushed out of the room as if a window had been thrown open. The frost on the glass melted in seconds. The figure was gone. I stood there shaking, not from fear exactly, but from the sheer impossibility of it. I checked the thermostat, 68 degrees again. No water on the floor, no footprints. The next morning, a major winter storm slammed into Kansas, unforecasted, fast-moving, one of the worst in decades. Whiteout conditions by noon. Command canceled all outdoor training, but one of my land navigation teams had already headed out at first light for a routine course in the training area north of Custer Hill. 4 soldiers, full cold weather gear, radios, GPS, everything by the book. When the storm hit, they lost visibility almost immediately. Radios crackled with static. We lost contact for over an hour. I led the quick reaction force myself. Humvees chaining up, pushing through drifts that were already knee-deep. We followed their last known grid, shouting their names into the wind. We found them huddled in a draw less than a kilometer from the barracks, half-buried, disoriented, early stages of hypothermia setting in. Their tracks had nearly vanished under the fresh snow. Another 30 minutes, and we might not have seen them at all. As we loaded them into the vehicles, one of the privates, barely conscious, lips blue, grabbed my sleeve. "Sir, there was a guy out there, old uniform, coat, and weird helmet, kept waving at us, pointing us back toward the lights, told us not to go deeper." The kid had never heard the barracks stories, none of them had. We got them to the aid station in time. No permanent damage. I never told anyone what I'd seen the night before. I didn't need to. The message had been delivered and received. After that rotation, I requested my platoon be moved to different billets. The request went through without questions. I still drive past Fort Riley sometimes. When snow is in the forecast, I think about that young soldier in the soaked greatcoat, still trying to keep the next platoon from making the same mistake his own did all those years ago. Maybe that's all a haunting really is. A warning from men who learn too late what the blizzard can take. Chapter 6. Echoes in the Snow. This chapter isn't one single testimony. It's pieces from many. Fragments collected from soldiers who lived in or passed through Building 5703 between 2015 and 2020, after the Army began tearing down the oldest sections and putting up new brick dorms. Most thought the activity would stop once the wood was gone, the floors ripped out, the boiler hauled away for scrap. But the echoes didn't stay confined to one building. They spread like cold air seeping through cracks into whatever came next. Specialist Jackson, a mechanic with the Brigade Support Battalion in 2016, told me he never believed the stories until he pulled night shift in the new barracks directly behind where 5703 used to stand. The new building was modern, central heat, carpeted halls, no creaks. But around Orodo 200 on the first real snow of the season, he heard it clear as day through the wall. Measured footsteps on wooden planks, marching slow and steady. He stepped into the hallway expecting to see someone pacing. Nothing. The sound stopped the moment he opened his door, but started again as soon as he closed it. That night, he slept with earbuds in and music loud enough to earn him an Article 15 for damaging his hearing. A female lieutenant from military intelligence, who asked that her name not be used, said that in 2017 her entire bay woke up at the same time one January night. No fire alarm, no loud noise, just every soldier sitting bolt upright in their racks as if called to attention. They compared notes the next morning. All of them had dreamed the same thing. Standing in formation in a blinding blizzard, snow up to their knees, watching a column of men in old greatcoats march past them into the white. None of the dream figures ever looked back. They just kept going until the snow swallowed them. She said the dream felt less like sleeping and more like remembering something that hadn't happened to them. Civilian contractors working the demolition in 2018 reported finding things that didn't belong. In the hollow spaces between floors, they pulled out rusted German mess kits, fragments of wool greatcoats, even a frozen leather boot that looked like it had been buried in ice for decades. Maintenance logs from the time show multiple reports of tools going missing from locked site trailers, only to be found lined up neatly on the concrete pad where the boiler room used to be, arranged like an inspection layout. Then there were the deployments. Soldiers from the 1st ID who'd lived in 5703 started reporting the same intrusions overseas, thousands of miles from Kansas. A sergeant in Kuwait in 2019 woke his whole tent one night, shouting in his sleep. When they shook him awake, he was shivering, teeth chattering, even though the desert air was over 100 degrees. He swore he'd been marching through snow so deep it pulled at his legs, following a platoon he couldn't see but could hear. Boots crunching ahead of him, calling out bearings he didn't understand. Another private in Syria, on guard in a sandbagged tower, claimed he saw a lone figure in the heat shimmer at the edge of the perimeter wire. Long coat flapping though there was no wind, rounded helmet catching the sun wrong. The figure raised an arm and pointed, not at the enemy direction but back toward the tower, urgent, like a warning. When the private radioed it in, the thermal scope showed nothing, no heat signature at all. A chaplain attached to the division collected several of these accounts independently. He told me privately that he began noticing a pattern. The sightings or dreams always happened just before something went wrong. A convoy hitting an IED that somehow didn't detonate fully. A patrol turning back minutes before walking into an ambush. A soldier pulling out of a mission with sudden severe illness, only to learn later the vehicle he would have ridden in took direct fire. Small miracles, the kind that get written off as luck. But too many, too close together. The old-timers on post still talk about it in hushed tones over coffee at the Chapette. They say the land on Custer Hill remembers every unit that ever trained there, every young man who marched across it before shipping out to war. And sometimes, when the snow falls just right, it remembers one platoon in particular, the one that marched out into a white hell on the far side of the world and never marched back. They're not angry, these echoes. They're not trying to scare anyone. They're still trying to bring their soldiers home. Or maybe they're trying to keep the next ones from following the same path into the storm. Either way, the marching never really stopped. It just moved into new buildings, into dreams, into the empty spaces soldiers carry with them wherever they go, because some losses are too heavy to ever truly leave behind. Chapter 7. The Final Patrol. My name is Sergeant Major Ryan Thompson again, retired now after 30 years in uniform, most of it with the big red one. I've carried a lot over the decades, deployments, losses, medals, regrets, but nothing has stayed with me quite like those nights in Building 5703. The footsteps, the cold, the figure at the end of the bay that looked right through me like I was the one out of time. Years after my last rotation through those barracks, long after they tore down the old wooden sections and paved over parts of Custer Hill for new construction, I still found myself driving back to Fort Riley now and then. Family visits, retirement ceremonies, or sometimes no reason at all. I'd take the long way around post, past the parade fields where entire divisions once formed up before heading to Europe, past the motor pools and the DFIC, and the rows of brick dorms that replaced the wartime relics. One December evening in 2023, I was passing through Kansas on my way to see my daughter in Colorado. Snow was coming down hard, big heavy flakes that stuck to the windshield faster than the wipers could clear them. The kind of storm that shuts down highways and makes you pull over just to wait it out. I saw the Fort Riley exit and, without really thinking, took it. The gate guards waved me through. Retiree ID still works like magic. I drove slow through the empty streets, past the closed shops on Main Post, until I found myself on Custer Hill. The old site of 5703 was a parking lot now, ringed by newer buildings. Floodlights cut through the falling snow, turning it into a swirling white curtain. I parked at the edge of the lot, engine off, heater dying. Just sat there, watching the snow pile up on the hood. The place looked nothing like it used to. No creaking floors, no narrow halls, no boiler rumble, but the air felt the same. Heavy, expectant. That's when I heard it. Faint at first, almost lost under the wind. Boots on wood, measured, deliberate. A full platoon's worth, marching in perfect step. Not from the new buildings, those had carpet and tile, but from the open space in front of me, where the old barracks had stood. I rolled the window down. Cold rushed in, sharp and clean. The marching grew clearer. Left, right, left, right. No voices, no commands, just the steady cadence of soldiers moving with purpose. Then I saw them, shapes in the snow. 38 figures, single file, emerging. From the tree line across the field, long greatcoats whipping in the wind, helmets catching the floodlights wrong, rifles slung. They marched straight across the open ground, boots leaving no prints in the fresh powder, straight toward where the front door of 5703 used to be. They didn't look at the new buildings, didn't look at my truck, just kept moving, eyes forward, like they'd done it 1,000 times before and would do it 1,000 more. I didn't feel fear, not exactly. More like recognition, like watching an old formation pass in review one final time. They reached the spot where the CQ desk had been. Stopped as one, came to attention. For a long moment, the snow kept falling around them, through them. Then the front rank turned, not sharp like a drill movement, but slow, deliberate, and faced the direction they'd come from, as if waiting for someone who hadn't caught up yet. I thought of Ellis muttering about the snow, of Hayes finding that helmet, of Lieutenant Rivera's warning the night before the storm, of every soldier who'd woken up cold in a warm room, hearing comrades calling from somewhere they couldn't reach. I thought about the real platoon, the one lost in 1943 near the Volkhov River. 38 German soldiers who marched out into a blizzard on the Eastern Front and simply ceased to exist. No bodies recovered, no equipment found, just footprints ending in the middle of nowhere. Maybe their echo found its way here because this place trained men for the same kind of war. Maybe trauma that deep doesn't respect oceans or decades. Or maybe some duties don't end just because the war does. The formation held for another minute. Then, without a word or signal I could see, they executed a perfect about-face and marched back the way they'd come, into the trees, into the white. The sound faded. The snow kept falling. I sat there until the windshield was completely covered and the cab grew cold enough to sting. When I finally started the engine and pulled away, the lot was empty. No tracks but my own tires. I haven't been back since, but I don't need to. Some patrols aren't about reaching a destination. They're about making sure no one else has to walk the same ground alone. And on certain nights, when the snow falls just right over military posts anywhere in the world, you can still hear them, boots keeping time, searching the dark for the ones who didn't make it back. Not to haunt, to guide. Because in the end, that's what soldiers do. We bring each other home, any way we can.